Absolutely great. Well. I kind of recognize this guy here. You used to be at Kensington Temple. So did I. Oh, wow. Thank you so much, church. Address particularly the leadership of the church, Pastor Peter Liu, Pastor Bruce Atkinson, and others that invited me to participate in your Easter conference and to celebrate with you this Easter Sunday. John chapter 20, verses 1 to 18. I want to read a good portion of Scripture today, looking at a gospel narrative, a gospel account of one of those early resurrection appearances on that first resurrection day. John chapter 20, verses 1 through 18. Now, on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early while it was still dark and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They've taken the Lord out of the tomb. We do not know where they've laid him." So Peter went out with the other disciple, and they were going towards the tomb. Both of them were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. And stooping to look in, he saw the linen cloths lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter came, following him, and went into the tomb. He saw the linen cloths lying there, and the face cloth which had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded up in a place by itself. Then the other disciple, who had reached the tomb first, also went in, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not understand the scriptures that he must rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to their homes. But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb, and as she wept, she stooped to look into the tomb, and she saw two angels in white, sitting where the body of Jesus had lain, one at the head and one at the feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "They've taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they've laid him." Having said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing, but she did not know it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you've laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father, but go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord," and that he had said these things to her. The Nicene Creed, which is one of the first creeds developed in the Council of Nicaea AD 325, and then later on the Council of Constantinople AD 381, was one of the early attempts to put into words the content of the Christian faith, gathering together their understanding of the scriptures and all that they knew about Jesus to try and define and to list beliefs and to put them in a form where believers could learn easily and join in confession and declaration of faith. The Nicene Creed begins like this: "I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, and of all things visible and invisible. It's very interesting to me that the Nicene Creed makes sure that in the creation understanding, there is the inclusion of the spiritual realm, the unseen realm. In other words, what we would rather roughly call angels, those spiritual beings that God actually created before he laid the foundation of the earth. We find in Job chapter 38 and verse 7, when God confronts Job after all those endless chapters of debate and agony and questioning, and God speaks to Job out of this storm, which was a manifestation and appearance of God. And he said, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth?" Then in verse 7 he said, "When the morning stars sang together and the sons of God shouted for joy." This was before the human creation. This was before the foundation of the earth. God created a heaven full of glorious spiritual beings in the invisible world. And what's very interesting for us as we go through the scriptures and progress in the Christian faith, in the Christian life, we get to understand that there is some extraordinary mingling, some joining of the spiritual realm and the physical realm. That what takes place in the spiritual realm affects what happens in the physical realm. And it is just a great clue for those people who are seeking the Lord for intercession and prophetic ministry. Very often, when you look at what's going on in the physical realm, you can get a hint, a clue of what's going on in the spiritual realm. Even in our day, when we see so much chaos and unbelief and confusion taking place in the earth, so many wars, then something extraordinary must be taking place in heaven as God continues to work out his purposes and bring the whole creation to its final climax at the return of Jesus Christ and the establishing of new heavens and new earth, where we will be with Christ, ruling and reigning with him forever. So now, we're going to approach the story from that perspective. I'm going to begin by describing some of the visible things. Then I'm going to go on and describe some of the invisible things, and they're very clear from the text. The invisible things, then we're going to come back to the visible world. So I won't leave you dangling in heaven. You'll go home okay today. So let's take the visible realm. What was happening in the visible realm? What could people see? Well, we understand that the crucifixion is real. It's real. There are people today who try to deny that Jesus actually deny that he existed. In other words, say that he did not exist. I went to a local humanist association by invitation, and they spent the whole time telling me that Jesus never existed. Anyway, historical evidence from outside the Bible verifies his existence, and why would we dismiss the actual evidence from the scriptures? Because the evangelists, the disciples, the apostles give evidence from what they saw and heard. They don't say, well, they would say that, wouldn't they, because they were believers. Actually, the things that they record and talk about, it took a long time for them to come to terms with it. And in fact, it wasn't until the resurrection that it actually began to make sense. The crucifixion is real. It actually happened. The physical body of Jesus was nailed to the cross, and there, for a number of hours, he suffered in agony. We have eyewitness account of what it looked like. Crown of thorns, the accusation, the charge against him, "You are the King of the Jews." We have the understanding and the visual pictures of the suffering of Jesus in the Gospels. We also have what he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? We even hear the words from the cross, Father, forgive them. They do not know what they're doing. And those final words, it is finished. All this happened. The crucifixion is real. And then so is the resurrection. This story is not some fanciful invention to boost some kind of theological position that for no reason the early disciples came to and decided, let's get some good stories around these vague ideas. No, the resurrection actually took place. And how beautiful is that evidence from scriptures. I'm just going to touch on just three very brief evidences, because if I go any deeper, I'll dip into my apologetic notes, which this isn't the occasion for. But by the way, I'm sure you teach on this in your school here. But let me just throw out three things. Number one, the empty tomb. That's an historical fact. Nobody can explain it other than Jesus rose from the dead. So just because the tomb was empty, why does that prove that Jesus was raised from the dead? Well, who emptied the tomb? Who took the body away? Some say, well, the disciples would steal it so that they can at least continue to have some kind of physical connection, even with the dead body of their teacher. But no, the disciples would therefore have been lying and saying, oh, Jesus is raised from the dead. Please close the door in case somebody notices the body we're hiding. People will often die for what they believe to be true, but people will very rarely die, if ever die, for something that they have invented and which would cost them their life. And also we can ask, well, did the Romans do it? No. If they wanted to disprove the story of the resurrection, just produce the body, and the same with the Jews. No, the empty tomb needs explanation. The biggest explanation would be, look, when the disciples started preaching resurrection, what would be the easiest way to disprove it? You say Jesus is alive? No, he's not. He's dead. Here is his body. Something similar happened a number of years ago in the nation of Pakistan, when the then president of Pakistan, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, was tried, some say on a false charge, and was hanged for murder. His followers political allies were so devastated, they could not accept, not even the news broadcasts, that their president was dead. And so some began to spread the rumor that no, he's still alive somewhere. And others began to say, well, if he died, he's back from the dead. And you know what the authorities did? To disprove that, they produced the body. Nobody was able to do that in Jesus' time, though many were highly motivated to do so, to disprove this growing and alarming story that Jesus was and is everything he claimed to be, as evidenced by the resurrection. Then the second batch of evidence is the resurrection appearances themselves, and we won't go into some of the counter-arguments, hallucinations, and so on and so on. All those are easily dismissed. There was an appearance of Jesus on one occasion of up to 500 people, and many of whom were still alive when Paul was describing this in 1 Corinthians 15. But I think one of the greatest facts that proves that Jesus Christ really was raised from the dead is the belief that it had taken place. Think for a moment. The belief that it had taken place. No critic of the gospel, no reputable critic anyway, denies the fact that the very early disciples were totally convinced in their own minds that Jesus was raised from the dead. What will account for that resurrection faith? I don't know if you notice in our reading, it says that Peter saw something, the empty tomb and the grave clothes. He saw it and believed. The visible evidence, the witness of his eyes, and so with the others who saw Jesus after he was raised from the dead, it was what they saw that led them to believe that Jesus was raised from the dead and therefore proclaim it. No. They did not understand at that point that Jesus was to rise from the dead. They weren't expecting it. It was completely outside of their frame of reference. They were so depressed and they were so disappointed. They had nowhere to turn. They were full of fear, but they heard some news. Jesus Christ was risen from the dead. Mary told them, Peter told them, John told them. And Jesus himself appeared to his disciples very soon after that resurrection. You all know the story of Thomas who missed the meeting. Don't miss meetings. You never know who's going to show up. Maybe Jesus will be there. And anyway, the next week they were gathered again and Jesus appeared. And Thomas, who had said, I'm never going to believe unless I see for myself, he saw for himself. And he said, my Lord, my God. No. Resurrection faith is founded on resurrection fact, and we believe too on the basis of their testimony all these years later. So here we have it. That's something of what was taking place in the visible realm. How about the invisible realm? What was happening behind the scenes in the spiritual world? Well, there was a lot happening over this Easter weekend, that first Easter. So much was taking place. So much that you can't see with your eyes because it's spiritual. Spiritual realities, they are as real as physical realities and visible realities. Don't forget, God first created the spiritual realm, the spiritual beings who are real. A couple of them show up here in our text, sitting in the tomb. One where Jesus' head lay and the other where his feet lay. Oh no, the spiritual realm is very, very real. What was taking place? Two things. One is to do with the cross, which of course was sealed and concluded in the resurrection. An atonement was taking place. That happens in the spiritual dimension. Just as in the Old Testament on the Day of Atonement, the priest would carry blood into the Holy of Holies, and that was forbidden of anybody else any other time of the year. And that was God's presence. So Jesus, in the spiritual realm, enters the presence of God, the very holy of holies of heaven, and there presents his atoning blood for us. It all happens in the spiritual realm. We don't see it, but we hear about it, and we believe it, and we experience it ourselves. The fact that Jesus died for the sins of the world means that by faith, today and every day, we can know that our sins are forgiven and that we are right with God. That was taking place in the spiritual realm. Something else was taking place there. And this has quite a lot to do with the resurrection, of course. In the invisible realm, not only was there atonement, but a spiritual victory over the powers of darkness, the unseen powers, the invisible powers, the spiritual powers who had rebelled against God. A victory was taking place in the spiritual realm, in the spiritual dimension. And we understand this from so many scriptures. There is a beautiful indication of it in our text. Did you notice that when Mary first sees Jesus, she doesn't recognize him? She wasn't expecting to see him. It was early morning. I don't know, it might have been that ancient first century equivalent of putting your clocks forward or back. It was in the very beginning, the sun had not yet risen, and by now there's a little bit of light, and possibly she's distressed, but possibly she's crying. And it wasn't until Jesus called her name that she recognized who it was. And she must have been so excited, because the text seems to suggest that she rushed up to grab hold of Jesus. That would have been the natural thing to do. There is a lot of physical embracing and fellowship that takes place in these ancient cultures, not so much in ours. Whenever I travel somewhere in the world, I give somebody a hug, they're shocked. They said, "I thought you were English." I said, "I'm not English, I'm British." Is that better or worse? I don't know. And they expect a stiff-armed handshake. But there was a lot of free physical expression in that way. She would have hugged Jesus, and she said, "Mary, you got to let me go. You can't hold on to me. You can't hold me here. Something is yet to happen that's not yet happened. I am to ascend to my Father. But what I want you to do is this. I want you to go to my brothers." Now think about that. Who is speaking? Jesus, of course. But who exactly? It's the risen Jesus in his risen, physical, resurrected body. And so the risen Jesus says, "Go to my brothers." What's that tell you? It tells you that as Jesus was raised from the dead, we too are also going to join him in resurrection brotherhood. Oh, it's so powerful. The book of Hebrews actually says this: "I'm not ashamed to call you my brothers, and I will declare God's name in the midst of the assembly of my brothers." I think that assembly is the assembly of the saved, redeemed, glorified people of God, but in the company of angels, so that we are one family, God's spiritual family and God's human family, glorified, risen together forever in heaven. It is going to be glorious. I nearly said, "I can't wait," but I think I will wait for as long as I have to. Let me as long as he wants me to. And so this spiritual victory that takes place, the Bible describes it as Satan being defeated, disarmed, driven out, and destroyed. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 14 in particular, speaks about the cross of Jesus and what would happen next, the resurrection, destroying the devil's power over death. Hebrews 2:14, that through death he might destroy the one who has power of death. If I said to you, who has power of death? You'd probably all say Jesus. This is a Sunday celebration, so the answer must be Jesus. But at this point, before the resurrection, the answer was not Jesus. The answer was the devil. The one who has power over death. That is the devil. So Jesus defeated the devil, triumphed over death, and now that's the victory that has taken place. So that's the second part of the invisible. Now let's get back to the visible. It's a not yet visibility. It's a visibility that shall be. When Jesus returns, he will return in the same way that he left. He will return personally. He will return visibly. He will return suddenly. And he will return gloriously. And every eye shall see him. And when he returns, manifesting the reality of the spiritual realm to all of us, he will also transform the physical reality that we know into a whole new reality, a recreated universe, a new heavens and a new earth. And we will be living with that wonderful union of spiritual reality and physical reality, transformed reality together. There will be no more kind of disconnect between what we see by faith and what we experience in our daily lives. The Bible puts it this way, 1 John chapter 3, verses 2-3. Beloved, we are God's children now, and what we will be has not yet appeared. See, there's a now and a not yet. But we know that when he appears, we shall be like him, because we shall see him as he is. And then the punchline. There is always a therefore. And especially when we rehearse and rejoice and celebrate and communicate such great truths as these truths of death and resurrection of Jesus, there's always a therefore. The Apostle John in 1 John 3 verse 3 says, and thus everyone who thus hopes, beautiful word, hope, a future expectation. That's our hope. The return of Jesus Christ, which is pointed to and indicated by the resurrection. The resurrection gives us hope for the future. And everyone who thus hopes in him purifies himself as he is pure, willing on the day of his power. I'm bringing the conference theme to land right now. Just with one more verse. Beautiful verse. 1 Corinthians 15, verses 54-58. Okay, several verses. Paul is speaking about the time when the perishable puts on the imperishable, and the mortal puts on immortality. Then shall come to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. We are willing because it's the day of his power. We are willing because his power operates in us. And we can be steadfast and immovable, abounding in the work of the Lord. And that is the take-home message from this Resurrection Sunday at Emmanuel Christian Church and Edgware and every other location that's under the sound of my voice today. God bless you, and very happy Resurrection Day.